Morning, church.
Morning.
Today's scripture reading will be from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 7 through 8. It reads, "We were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So, being affectionately desirous of you, we are ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us."
The word for happy in Matthew chapter 5 is Makarios, where Jesus said, blessed. And he has a bunch of different qualities of character that he mentions, but I think it's a wonderful concept to think about mothers. When we say Happy Mother's Day, we should think of the word Makarios, which means blessed. Be blessed as mothers. And blessed means the supreme happiness. And so we just like to say Makarios to the mothers today. Be extremely blessed. Be extremely joyful for your role as mothers. Today the subject is a mother's love, in parentheses, by God's design. By God's design. God has a design. And we want to celebrate God in his design for mothers today in the message. And without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into it. The bad news is you're not going to beat the other folks to the restaurants today, like a couple of weeks ago when I preached. But the good news is there's a lot of encouragement for our moms in the scriptures and the principles that God has for us. Women are under a lot of pressure. The civil rights movement is not finished. And there's a lot to be finished on a lot of fronts, and particularly with women. That's not what the message is about. But in the context of that, and not to minimize that in any way whatsoever, in the context of that, we need to recognize that women are under a great deal of pressure in our society. And especially moms. Especially moms. Moms are expected to be attractive, to go to the gym, make sure you're doing all your exercises, eating right, make sure you're up on all of the latest nutrition, make sure you have all the right subscriptions, make sure you get to the gym, as we mentioned, several times a week, make sure you do enough steps. How many steps is it? 10,000? Make sure you're beautiful, especially in comparison to other ladies and other people, to be successful at work, for your business to succeed, not to look like you're a minimalist in comparison to men, to look like you're just as successful, certainly are capable, and in many cases far surpass men. In business, in your professions, in your careers, in your jobs. To have a beautiful home, to make sure your home is beautiful and immaculate and spectacular, and that you're wonderful hostesses and everything is in its place and everything is perfect. To make sure that your kids get to all their appointments on time, to make sure your kids are getting their reading and studying done at night, that you're doing the reading courses with them that the teacher is recommending that you do, you're going over the vocabulary words, to make sure your kids are well taken care of. It's amazing, as I was thinking about all the pressures on moms, how much pressure there is on you in our society to get all of that right. And if that weren't enough, there's been this battle between the sexes, and it didn't start yesterday. It started a long time ago. The battle between the sexes, in the 70s, there was a tennis match between Bobby Riggs and Billie Jean King, 72 or 73 or something like that. But that wasn't the first tennis match titled The Battle Between the Sexes. It was one that came after a few others and before some other ones. After this one, Navratilova played Jimmy Connors. The Williams sisters made the statement that they could beat any man ranked over 200 in the men's ATP. So number 203, Karsten Brash, I believe his name is, I believe from Australia, said, okay, I'll take you on. He was number 203, and after he beat Venus, he beat Serena. And then the Williams sisters said, we can beat any man over 350 in the men's ranking. Yannick Noah, Justine Henin, Novak Djokovic, Li Na. The battle of the sexes. In every one of these tennis battles, there's always been provisions made. The girls get the doubles court to hit into, and the men have to hit into the singles court, so it gives them a wider court to hit into. In some of them, the girls would start out with a 30-love advantage, which is 2 points. Need 5 to win. But the point is not about who wins or who loses. The point is, even in the making of the provisions, there's a recognition of we're different. Men and women are different. And that's great. That's wonderful. God made us different. Why put the pressure on women to be anything other than what God created them to be? The battle, there doesn't need to be a battle between sexes. There needs to be cooperation and complementing between the sexes. The world tries to get women to conform, to be pressed into a mold, as we mentioned, to be perfect at all those things. The Bible says, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, testing so that you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. In other words, don't be pressed into the mold that society is trying to press you into. I'm glad that women are successful at many, many things. And it's wonderful and certainly correct that women should be successful at a lot of things. But I would encourage you women, especially the moms, don't let the society around you press you into a mold. Just let your mind be transformed by what God has created you to be. God has a plan, and that plan is for women and men to be complementary, not to be in a battle, not to be competitive. God has a plan and a design. Part of that design is evidenced in science. A gentleman, Dr. Jans, wrote an article in 2014 called Brain Differences Between the Genders. I'm going to read parts of it, not a lot of it, but parts of it to give us an idea of what he's talking about. And number one, he starts off with a disclaimer and says, obviously no two people are exactly alike. There's differences even in gender. Men different than other men and women different than other women. But that being said, there's been a lot of research done on brain activity between males and females and how that works. In processing, male brains tend to utilize nearly 7 times more gray matter than female brains, which use about 10 times more white matter. What does this mean? Gray matter of the brain is localized. This is information action processing centers in specific areas of the brain. This can translate into a kind of tunnel vision, so that when men are doing something, they're deeply engaged in a task or a game, they may not demonstrate much sensitivity to other people and their surroundings. Think back to the Super Bowl when your husband was locked in front of the TV and you were with your girlfriends chatting about the kids or when you're gonna get your hair done or the nails or even work tomorrow. What was your husband doing? Well, if he's like me, he's probably 3 feet from the TV, and all the ladies back there in the Biggers house were chatting about, oh, how wonderful the kitchen looked and all of the food and all of that. And I said, be quiet, I'm trying to focus on the game. God has made men's brains that way. That's why we're that way. And a lot of men are that way. Chemistry. Male and female brains process the same neurochemicals, but to different degrees and through gender-specific connections. Some dominant neurochemicals, like serotonin, which among other things help us sit still. Men don't have a lot of serotonin. Male brains don't have a lot of serotonin. They have a lot more testosterone, which is a very aggressive chemical. Females have more estrogen, which has to do with the reproductive chemical process, and oxytocin, which is more related to bonding and relationships. In part because of the differences in these chemicals, males tend to be less inclined to sit still, as long as females tend to be more physically impulsive and aggressive. Additionally, males process less of the bonding chemical oxytocin than females. Overall, a major takeaway of this is that boys at times need different strategies to release stress than girls. Boys have a hard time sitting still. So the teacher says, Tommy, why can't you sit still and do your math like Sally over there? Well, because Tommy has different chemicals going on in his brain, and he can't sit still in class. He's got to move, and Sally can just sit there all day and work on her math. and reading and other things. And so that's a very real difference that Dr. Jans noted in the chemical functions of the brain. Structural differences. A number of structural elements in the human brain differ between males and females. Females often have a larger hippocampus, which is the memory center. Females have a larger or higher density of connections in the hippocampus. As a result, girls and women tend to input and absorb more sensorial and emotive information than males do. And by sensorial, we mean information that comes from all the five senses. If you note your observations over the next months, boys and girls and women and men, you'll find that females tend to sense a lot more of what's going on around them throughout the day, and they retain that sensorial information more than men. Nancy's always asking me when we drive, did you see that over there? Did you see that over there? I go, I'm looking right ahead, babe. And she's noticing all of this stuff going on, and women are really, really good at that. God has made their brains that way, to notice all the different stuff that's going on and process that simultaneously, and men are more tunnel vision. Additionally, boys and girls, before they're born, their brains develop with different hemispheric divisions of labor, the right and left hemispheres. The male and female brain are not set up the same way. Females tend to have verbal centers on both sides of the brain. Males tend to have their verbal centers only on the left hemisphere. This is a significant difference. Girls tend to use more words when discussing and describing incidents, story, person, object, feeling, and place. Male only have a few verbal centers in general, but often they're less connected, and so their word centers and their word centers and their memories and feelings. So when it comes to discussing feelings and emotions and senses together, girls have the advantage. They tend to have more interest in talking about all the details and all these things. From the very beginning, before kids are born, God has said male and female brains are different. And the chemicals in their body that flow through every cell of their body, the hormones in every cell of their body are different. Evidence in creation. In the first creation account, God said, I'm going to make man. Man means mankind. It doesn't mean man male. Because in Genesis 1, when he says, I'm going to make man, he says, I'm going to make him male and female. Two genders. In the second creation account, he said he didn't even need man's help at all. He put man to sleep so man couldn't take any credit for it. God made the male, and then God made the female out of a male part. And then the male woke up and he said, God said, this is going to be your helper. A lot of times we think helper, well, it's inferior, but it's not all inferior. God has called the male's helper as well in many parts of the scripture. So it's not about higher or lower, inferiority or superiority. It's simply, this is the one you need. This is the one who is going to be with you, your companion. Bone of your bones, flesh of your flesh, same blood. You know, when people die on the battlefield, when soldiers are on the battlefield, and there's African Americans, and there's Asians, and there's Anglos or Caucasians, they say, we all bleed the same color of blood. And that's a very similar thing that Adam is saying. This is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. Yeah, we're different, but we're really the same. And in the sin account, God's design is evident. Adam to toil and labor over the land. Eve would to be given pain in childbirth. A very misunderstood text in 1 Timothy 15 when it talks about the woman says she shall be saved through childbearing if she continues in faith, love, and holiness. The point of that scripture in 1 Timothy 2 is not that the woman has to bear children to be saved. The point is that's the role God has given women, and if they don't bear children, that's fine. God has certainly talked about that in the scriptures. It's fine to be a single woman, not have children. But if a woman, as many women are childbearing, then she's in that role. That's the role God has given her. And the text formally talks about a role that has been given to men. They need to take some leadership in some areas that many times men fall down in, and the women need to do both. But the point of this is, it just affirms that God in creation distinguished some roles. She's a mother. Not a whole lot of men have babies. All of us have a mom. The mother's loved by God's design. God has a design. And it's evidenced not only in science, it's evidenced obviously in God's creation. A mother's love by God's design, I've chosen 3 ways to just point out how it's expressed. Number 1, nurturing, the scripture we had read a little bit earlier. 1 Thessalonians 2, it's actually verses, I believe, 7 through 8 instead of 1 and 2. We were gentle among you like a nursing mother, taking care of her children, so being affectionately desirous of you. There's very little that compares with tenderness and gentleness like a mom who's just had a baby taking care of her little one. And so we love that image, how women are just nurturing by nature. God has set up their bodies, has set up their brains, has set up their whole being, and the way that they're able to work across different hemispheres of the brain and see everything that's going on when the kids are doing stuff and feel everything and experience a wide range of connectivity in their brain and knowing what's going on and connecting and communication with people and applying that to nurturing. A mother's love by God's design is nurturing. Now, Paul uses this. Obviously, Paul uses this in the 1 Thessalonians passage to say, he's not talking about mothering really there. He's talking about how we discipled you, how we made you disciples, how we brought you up. But he takes that truth of the way God made mothers and he applies it to how he, as the apostle, was among the Thessalonians in bringing them into a knowledge of Christ. They were just like a mom, gentle and tender, nurturing. Those of you who are moms, rejoice in the fact that God has made you really good nurturers. Really good nurturers. It just comes natural to you. You're wired that way. It's just easier for you. That's the way God made you. So rejoice in that. And take full advantage of expressing that. Don't feel like you got to be fit into a mold and be accomplished at all these other things. Just be a nurturer of the children that God puts and the people that God puts in your presence. A mother's love by God's design is also giving. Notice the last part of that verse. We were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you had become very dear to us. It's not uncommon for a mother, and we all know this. Moms will just sacrifice themselves for their kids in lots of different ways. So, several stories. I'm just going to share one. So this is an email that came, and I apologize for my Mandarin. I don't speak Mandarin. I don't even have a clue how to pronounce any of this stuff in Mandarin. So I'm just going to go for it. And so this is an email from Ki Huang that was for about 10 years ago. And it was sent to the Church of Christ in Abilene, Texas, one of the churches there. First of all, thank you so much for your concerns about our families and our friends. As you know, on Monday, May 12th, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake hit South China, Sichuan province. As of today, thousands are now homeless. I think 80,000 were killed in an earthquake in 2008. Thousands have become orphans, and some have lost their only child. I would like to share with you the following true story from Sichuan. It was the third day after the earthquake. The rescue workers were still looking for survivors. They knew with every minute passing by, the chance to find someone grew even slimmer. Come here, there's a body, shouted a rescue worker. His fellow workers rushed over to the spot. Under a big chunk of roof was a woman. She was lying with a strange pose. She knelt to the ground and her upper body stretched forward. Her head was on the ground as well, as if she was praying for survival. The nurse and the rescue team struggled to reach her through the debris. It was difficult. There was no space. The woman was not responsive to any call. However, just to make sure, the nurse tried to test her breath as to see if she was still breathing, but she wasn't. She was breathless, and her body was cold. She was dead. So the team moved on. There were other people buried. They could not afford to spend time in retrieving a dead body, so all of a sudden, the captain suddenly ran back to the woman as if he had realized something. When he reached the spot, he lay down and he put his head next to the roof piece that was over her body and stretched his arm to touch the space under her abdomen. "There's a baby in here, and he's alive. He's alive," he cried out to his team members. It was a newborn. He was neatly wrapped in a red blanket decorated with yellow flowers. Miraculously, he didn't even have a scratch on his body. When he was taken out from the rubble, he was sleeping, peacefully sleeping. The nurse took the baby from the rescue worker and started doing the routine exams. And when she unwrapped the blanket, she found a cell phone tucked between the baby and the baby's diaper. It had a text message on the screen which read, "My baby, if you can survive, please remember, Mom loves you." Natural disaster can happen anywhere. Victims of this tragedy need your support. Despite any cultural and political differences we may have, at the end of the day, we need to come together. There's another story about a mom. And you know, when I think of Samuel and Hannah's giving to Samuel, I often think of Hannah doing this for the Lord. But then I reflected a little bit on when Hannah, who was barren and not able to have children, promised to God, "If you give me a son, I will give him to you." And she fulfilled her promise and took him to the place in Shiloh, a place of worship, and turned him over to Eli, the prophet. Hannah was also not only giving him to God, think of what Hannah was giving to her son. Think of what she was giving to Samuel. She was giving Samuel an education in the things of God, surrounding him in the place with people in the place where God was worshiped. He would be discipled by Eli. He would be brought up in the house of God. Hannah would visit him from time to time. But she was not only giving her gift back to God, but she was giving her son. Moms are givers. And the lady in China in 2008 who curled over her little baby to protect him is not unusual. There's a lot of stories about that. I was reading one a couple of weeks ago that I shared with Nancy that happened in Saudi Arabia. Very similar. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a car crash. And the mom at the last second curled over her little 4-year-old boy. And the boy was brought out from the rubble of the crash alive. And 20 years later, the story was written talking about the 24-year-old boy and how he thanks his mom for saving his life. That is not uncommon for a mother's love to be giving. Paul said, we give our very selves to raise you up in the Lord, just like a mom does that. That's a mother's love by God's design. Moms will just give themselves for the kids. And Hannah gave Samuel so much by giving him to the Lord. One of the things my mom did as a single mom, 14 years old, she just made sure we had a church. And so when we came to Indio, she made sure she connected us with the church over in Indio. That was a very, very wonderful gift to give her boys. And so this is a wonderful thing. It's not how much, Teresa of Calcutta says, it's not how much we do, but it's how much love we put into what we do. It's not how much we give, but it's how much love we put into the giving. So when the world says, ladies, you have to do all this stuff, you have to be all this stuff, you have to be good at all this stuff, that's not true. Just be good at what God has called you to do. Just be the giver you naturally are to your kids in many of different ways that you can give, whether it's giving your child education in the Lord, or reading with your child, or helping your child learn things, just giving your time to your child and your children. Give what God has put in your hands to give. A mother's love by God's design is not only giving, it's not only nurturing, it's forever. 1 Corinthians 13:8 says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. You can never think of something that's more indicative of love than a mom who just loves her kids. So he said in Isaiah 49:15, God is saying, can a woman forget her nursing child? I think that's pretty hard. There's probably a couple. They're the ones that make the papers probably. It's probably a couple of ladies and every now and again they forget their nursing child, but that just doesn't happen on a very frequent basis. Can she who have no compassion for the son of her womb? That is just not very common. But God says, my love is so great for you, even though those 2 or 3 in the history of humanity may do that, I will not forget you. So God uses that to say, a mother's love is so compassionate, so enduring. Moms just love their kids from birth till as far as it goes. Moms are always concerned about how their kids are coming out. So I heard a term last week, don't be a helicopter mom. So helicopter mom, what's that? Well, that's when your kids are what? Still in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and where's mom? All over them just concerned about what they're doing. But that's within the nature. And so there's parts of that helicopter mom that may be negative, but within the nature at least of being interested and concerned and loving, and that love being forever, that's what moms are created to be. So Somehow that didn't work, so let's try it again. I want you to look at this and see if this works.
Love You
Go ahead and-
Forever.
go ahead and
An
turn down the
original
lights. This
story
illustrates
by Robert
some of what we're
Munch,
talking about.
illustrated by Sheila McGraw.
Turn down the lights for a couple
A
of
mother
minutes.
held her new baby and very slowly rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she held him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The baby grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was 2 years old, and he ran all around the house. He pulled all the books off the shelves. He pulled all the food out of the refrigerator, and he took his mother's watch and flushed it down the toilet. Sometimes his mother would say, "This kid is driving me crazy." But at nighttime, when that 2-year-old was quiet, she opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, looked up over the side of his bed, and if he was really asleep, she picked him up and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. While she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The little boy grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was 9 years old, and he never wanted to come in for dinner. He never wanted to take a bath, and when Grandma visited, he always said bad words. Sometimes his mother wanted to sell him to the zoo. But at nighttime, when he was asleep, the mother quietly opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of the bed. If he was really asleep, she picked up that 9-year-old boy and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. The boy grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was a teenager. He had strange friends, and he wore strange clothes, and he listened to strange music. Sometimes the mother felt like she was in a zoo. But at nighttime, when that teenager was asleep, the mother opened the door to his room, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of the bed. If he was really asleep, she picked up that great big boy and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. While she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. That teenager grew. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until he was a grown-up man. He left home and got a house across town. But sometimes, on dark nights, the mother got into her car and drove across town. If all the lights in her son's house were out, she opened his bedroom window, crawled across the floor, and looked up over the side of his bed. If that great big man was really asleep, she picked him up and rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she rocked him, she sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be. Well, that mother, she got older. She got older and older and older. One day, she called up her son and said, You'd better come see me because I'm very old and sick. So her son came to see her. When he came in the door, she tried to sing the song. She sang, I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always. But she couldn't finish because she was too old and sick. The son went to his mother. He picked her up and rocked her back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and he sang this song.
I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my mommy you'll be.
When the son came home that night, he stood for a long time at the top of the stairs. Then he went into the room where his very new baby daughter was sleeping. He picked her up in his arms and very slowly rocked her back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while he rocked her, he sang,
I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be.